The train was already 3 hours late when Xavier Quinn first arrived at the Fort Lyon station platform on that crisp October morning in 1881, his heart hammering against his ribs as he clutched the telegram that had changed everything. The message was simple, worn from being folded and refolded in his pocket over the past 2 weeks. Coming to Colorado. Arriving October 15th. All my love, Theresa. He had met Theresa Edwards exactly 1 year ago in St. Louis, where he had gone to sell cattle for his ranch. She had been working at her aunt's boarding house, serving meals to travelers and ranch hands passing through. The moment their eyes met across that crowded dining room, something had shifted in Xavier's chest, like the earth beneath his feet had suddenly become unsteady. She had smiled at him, a real smile that reached her green eyes and made them sparkle with something he could not quite name but desperately wanted to understand. Their courtship had been brief, but intense. He had extended his stay in St. Louis by 2 weeks, finding excuses to return to that boarding house every day. They had walked along the Mississippi River, talking about everything and nothing. She had told him about losing her parents to typhoid when she was 16, about the aunt who had taken her in, but treated her more like a servant than family. He had spoken of his ranch outside Fort Lyon, of the endless Colorado sky and the mountains that rose like sentinels in the distance. When it came time for him to leave, he had taken her hands in his and asked her to marry him. The proposal had tumbled out awkwardly, nothing like he had imagined during the sleepless nights before. But she had said yes without hesitation, tears streaming down her face as she threw her arms around his neck. The plan was simple. He would return to Colorado, make arrangements for their life together, and she would follow in the spring after settling her affairs and saving enough for the journey. But spring had turned to summer, and summer to fall, with only letters between them. Then came the telegram, and Xavier's world had suddenly snapped back into focus. Now he stood on the platform, watching the empty tracks stretch toward the eastern horizon, willing the train to appear. Other passengers who had been waiting began to disperse as the station master announced an indefinite delay due to issues down the line. But Xavier did not move. He had waited months for this day. A few more hours meant nothing. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and still Xavier remained. He removed his hat, running his fingers through his dark hair, then replaced it to shield his eyes from the glare. His ranch foreman, Marcus, could handle things for 1 day, for 100 days if necessary. Nothing was more important than being here when Theresa arrived. By noon, the station master, a portly man named Henderson with a thick gray mustache, approached him with a concerned expression. "Son, that train is not coming today. Telegraph just came through. There was a bridge collapse east of here. They are routing passengers around, but it will be at least tomorrow, maybe the day after." Xavier felt his stomach drop, but he nodded slowly. "I will be here tomorrow then. You might want to check back. No sense standing here all day and night." But Xavier could not bring himself to leave. What if the telegraph was wrong? What if Theresa arrived and he was not here to meet her? The thought of her stepping off that train, looking for his face in the crowd and not finding it, made his chest tighten with an almost physical pain. He compromised by sitting on one of the wooden benches, his eyes never leaving the eastern tracks. Henderson shook his head but said nothing more, disappearing back into his office. The afternoon wore on. Other trains came and went, heading west toward Denver or south to New Mexico territory. Passengers bustled past, some giving Xavier curious glances, others too absorbed in their own journeys to notice the solitary cowboy keeping vigil. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded him of Theresa's descriptions of sunset over the Mississippi, Xavier finally stood and stretched his cramped legs. He walked to the edge of the platform, looking out at the town of Fort Lyon spreading before him. The town had grown considerably since he had first arrived 5 years ago, drawn by the promise of cheap land and the opportunity to build something with his own hands. His ranch was modest, about 15 miles northwest of town, with a sturdy house he had built himself and expanded over the past year in preparation for Theresa's arrival. He had added a parlor with windows facing east to catch the morning sun, remembering how she had mentioned loving to drink coffee and watch the sunrise. The bedroom had a real bed frame shipped from Denver, not just the rope and timber construction most ranchers made do with. He had even commissioned a quilt from Mrs. Patterson in town, a beautiful pattern of interlocking rings in shades of blue and cream. Everything was ready. Everything except the bride. Xavier returned to his bench and settled in for the night. He had his bedroll tied to his saddle, and his horse was stabled at the livery nearby. If he got cold, he could retrieve the blanket. But the October night was mild, and he found he did not mind the slight chill that crept in as darkness fell. He must have dozed off because he jerked awake to the sound of the morning train whistle. His heart leaped, but it was only the westbound freight, not the passenger train from the east. Henderson emerged from his office, looking surprised to see Xavier still there. "You stayed all night." "Said I would be here." The station master's expression softened. "Your lady is lucky to have someone so devoted, but I got another telegraph this morning. That bridge collapse is worse than they thought. Going to be at least a week before they can run regular passenger service through. They are putting folks on wagons to get around the damaged section, then back on trains, but it is slow going. A week." Xavier absorbed this information, then nodded. "I will be here," and he was, every single day. The first few days, people in town thought it was romantic, if a bit eccentric. Marcus brought him meals and updates from the ranch. His neighbors, the Donnelly family, sent their daughter Charlotte to invite him to supper, but he politely declined, not wanting to miss even the possibility of Theresa's arrival. After 2 weeks, the romantic gesture began to seem more like stubbornness or possibly madness. The bridge had been repaired, but now there were reports of early snow in the mountains further east, delaying trains. Then a robbery on the line. Then a derailment that, thankfully, resulted in no serious injuries but caused yet another delay. Xavier endured the pitying looks and well-meaning advice to go home and wait there. But he could not shake the image of Theresa arriving to an empty platform, thinking he had changed his mind or forgotten her. So he remained, a constant fixture at the Fort Lyon station, through rain and wind and the first dusting of snow that came and melted by afternoon. He wrote letters to her, care of general delivery in various towns where he thought she might be stranded, but received no replies. The uncertainty gnawed at him. Was she safe? Was she still coming? Had something happened to her? Marcus visited nearly every day, bringing news from the ranch and clean clothes. "The men are getting restless," he said one November afternoon, sitting beside Xavier on the bench that had become as familiar as his own saddle. "They do not understand why you are not coming back. The ranch can survive without me for a while longer. Theresa cannot arrive without me being here to meet her." "What if she is not coming at all?" Marcus asked gently. "What if something changed her mind?" Xavier's jaw tightened. "She is coming, I know it." But as November turned to December, even his certainty began to waver. It had been nearly 2 months since that first day on the platform. The telegram had said October 15th. It was now December 3rd. He had worn through the knees of one pair of pants, and the soles of his boots were getting thin from pacing the platform. His face was weathered from constant exposure to the elements, and he had lost weight, despite the meals Marcus and others brought him. He looked, he knew, like a madman or a beggar, not the successful rancher who had proposed to a beautiful woman in St. Louis. On December 10th, as snow fell in earnest for the first time that winter, Henderson approached him with an expression that made Xavier's heart sink. "Xavier, I got a telegraph you need to see." His hands shook as he took the paper, scanning the words with growing dread, but it was not what he expected. It was from Theresa, delayed in Kansas, still coming. "Do not give up on me. Love, Theresa." The relief that flooded through him was so intense he had to sit down. She was alive. She was still coming. She had not forgotten him or changed her mind. Henderson clapped him on the shoulder. "Told you faith pays off sometimes." Xavier folded the telegraph carefully and placed it in his pocket with the original one, now tattered and barely legible. "When is the next train from the east?" "Should be tomorrow afternoon, weather permitting." Tomorrow afternoon. Xavier could wait one more day. He could wait forever if necessary. The snow continued through the night and into the next day, accumulating several inches on the platform. Xavier swept it clear, keeping himself busy, keeping his mind from spiraling into the hundreds of things that could still go wrong. The afternoon train was delayed by 3 hours due to snow on the tracks, but it came. Xavier stood at the edge of the platform, his heart in his throat, as the great iron beast huffed and squealed to a stop. Steam billowed around the cars, obscuring his view of the passengers disembarking. He scanned every face, every form, but Theresa was not among them. Disappointment crashed over him, but he pushed it aside. Tomorrow. She would come tomorrow, but she did not come tomorrow or the next day or the day after that. December marched on toward Christmas, and still Xavier waited. The town prepared for the holiday with decorations and caroling, but he barely noticed. His entire world had narrowed to the platform and the eastern horizon. On Christmas Eve, Father Donnelly from the Catholic Church came to see him, bringing hot cider and warm bread. "Come to midnight mass tonight, Xavier. You can be back by morning. The Lord would want you to celebrate his birth." "I will celebrate when Theresa arrives." The priest sighed but did not argue further. "I will pray for her safe arrival, my son." Xavier spent Christmas Day alone on the platform, watching families come and go, feeling the ache of loneliness but refusing to abandon his post. He thought of Theresa, wondering where she was spending this day, hoping she was safe and warm. The new year came and went with little fanfare for Xavier. The town celebrated, fireworks exploding over Fort Lyon, but he sat in his usual spot, wrapped in his blanket, his eyes fixed on those eternal tracks. January was brutal, with temperatures dropping below zero and winds that cut through every layer of clothing. Marcus begged him to at least spend the nights at the boarding house in town, but Xavier refused. He had made it this far. He would not break now. Mrs. Patterson, the woman who had made Theresa's quilt, began bringing him meals daily, her maternal instincts unable to bear seeing him suffer. "You are going to freeze to death out here," she scolded, though her eyes were kind. "I have survived worse." "That may be, but your bride will not want to arrive to find you dead from stubbornness." He knew she was right, but he could not make himself leave. The fear that he would miss Theresa, that she would think he had abandoned her, was stronger than any physical discomfort. In mid-January, Henderson received another telegram from Theresa. She had been stranded in a Kansas town called Dodge City when the railroad company went bankrupt and stopped running trains on that section of track. She had been working to earn money for stage passage, but had been robbed of her savings. She was devastated but determined. She would find another way. Xavier sent money immediately, wiring it to Dodge City with instructions for her to take the first available transport to Colorado. He would be waiting. The response came a week later. The money had arrived safely. She would be on her way soon. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for believing in me. February brought a thaw, turning the snow to slush and the roads to mud. The trains ran more reliably, but still Theresa did not arrive. Xavier began to recognize the regular travelers, the salesmen and soldiers and families who passed through Fort Lyon weekly or monthly. They all knew his story now, the patient cowboy waiting for his bride. Some thought it romantic. Others thought it foolish, but none could deny the steadfastness of his devotion. On March 2nd, Marcus arrived at the station with disturbing news. "We have got trouble at the ranch. Cattle rustlers hit the Johnson place last night. Sheriff thinks they might be working their way through the valley." Xavier's first instinct was to ride out immediately to protect what he had built, but then he looked at the tracks, stretching east toward Theresa, and shook his head. "You can handle it. Take the men, set up watch rotation, move the herd closer to the house if you need to. Xavier, you need to be there. It is your ranch. And Theresa is going to be my wife. She is more important." Marcus stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head in disbelief and perhaps a bit of admiration. "You are either the most devoted man I have ever met or the most foolish. Maybe both." The rustlers never made it to Xavier's ranch. The Johnsons and their neighbors, with Marcus's help, caught them 2 days later. But Xavier would not have known about any of it if Marcus had not come back to tell him. His entire existence had become the platform, the tracks, and the waiting. March was 6 months since that first day in October. Half a year of waiting, hoping, believing. Xavier marked the anniversary by cleaning his boots and getting a shave at the barber shop, wanting to look presentable for when Theresa finally arrived. He barely recognized his own reflection in the barber's mirror. His face was leaner, more weathered, with new lines around his eyes. But there was also something else, something harder and more determined than had been there before. The barber, a talkative man named Samuel, worked in silence for once, sensing perhaps that this was a significant day. When he finished, he refused payment. On the house. For the man who taught this whole town about real love. Xavier wanted to protest, but the words stuck in his throat. He nodded his thanks and returned to his bench. April brought wildflowers and warmer temperatures. The prairie around Fort Lyon burst into color, and Xavier thought about how much Theresa would love to see it. He picked a bouquet one morning and kept it in a jar of water on the platform, refreshing it every few days, ready to give to her. On April 12th, a Tuesday that started like any other, Xavier sat on his bench watching the morning sun climb higher. He had just finished the breakfast Mrs. Patterson had brought when Henderson emerged from his office, walking faster than usual. Trains coming. The eastbound morning passenger. Xavier stood, his heart beginning to race. How many times had he stood like this? How many trains had he watched arrive, hoping this would be the one? But something felt different today. The air seemed clearer, the sun brighter. Or maybe it was just his imagination, desperate for this to be the day. The train appeared on the horizon, growing larger as it approached. Xavier moved to the edge of the platform, the bouquet of wildflowers clutched in one hand. The great engine rolled past, slowing, brakes squealing. The passenger cars followed, 1, 2, 3. Then it stopped. The conductor opened the door of the first passenger car and people began to disembark. A businessman with a leather case, a woman with 2 young children, a soldier in uniform. Xavier's eyes scanned each face, his breath caught somewhere between hope and fear. And then he saw her. Theresa stepped down from the train, her dark hair longer than he remembered, cascading over her shoulders beneath a worn traveling bonnet. Her green dress was dusty from the journey, and she looked exhausted, circles under her eyes speaking of sleepless nights and hard travel. But she was here. She was real. She was finally here. Their eyes met across the platform, and for a moment neither of them moved. Time seemed to suspend, holding them in this perfect instant of recognition and reunion. Then Theresa's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks as she dropped her small carpet bag and ran toward him. Xavier met her halfway, catching her in his arms, the wildflowers crushed between them as they held each other for the first time in a year. She was sobbing against his chest, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry I am late. Everything went wrong, everything, and I thought you would hate me, thought you would give up. But I had to keep trying because I love you so much, and I could not bear the thought of never seeing you again." Xavier buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. "I told you I would be here. I told you I would wait." She pulled back to look at him, her hands coming up to frame his face. "Henderson told me. He told me you have been here every day since October. Every single day. Xavier, that is 6 months, I know. You did not leave, not even once. I could not. What if you arrived and I was not here?" Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling now, that beautiful smile he had dreamed about for months. "I do not deserve you. You deserve everything." He kissed her then, right there on the platform with Henderson and Mrs. Patterson and half the town watching. It was not the gentle, proper kiss of their courtship in St. Louis. It was a kiss filled with 6 months of longing, of fear and hope and unwavering faith. It was a promise and a commitment and a celebration all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Theresa laughed through her tears. "I look terrible. I have been traveling for weeks, sleeping in train stations and cheap hotels. My dress is filthy and my hair is a disaster, and I probably smell like the cattle car I had to ride in for 2 days when there were no passenger seats available. You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." And he meant it. She could have arrived in rags covered in mud, and she still would have been beautiful to him. Mrs. Patterson approached, dabbing at her own eyes with a handkerchief. "Welcome to Fort Lyon, dear. We have all been waiting for you almost as long as Xavier has." Theresa turned to the older woman, her hand still firmly clasped in Xavier's, as if she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. "Thank you. I cannot tell you how many times I nearly gave up, how many times I thought about just staying wherever I was stranded. But I kept thinking about Xavier, about the life we planned, and I found a way to keep going." Henderson retrieved her carpet bag, which appeared to contain all her worldly possessions, and Xavier was struck by how little she had, how much she had given up to make this journey. "Tell me," he said as they walked toward the livery to get his horse. "Tell me everything that happened." So she did, the words pouring out as if a dam had broken. She told him about leaving St. Louis with such hope, only to have her train break down in Missouri. About the bridge collapse that had caused that first delay. About making it to Kansas, and then having the railroad company go bankrupt, stranding dozens of passengers. About working in a hotel kitchen to earn money for stage passage, only to have it stolen by the man who had seemed so friendly and helpful. "I cried for 2 days, she admitted, her voice quiet. "I thought that was it, that I would be stuck in Dodge City forever, that I would never make it to you." "What changed?" A woman at the hotel, one of the other workers. Her name was Sarah, and she had her own story of heartbreak and survival. She told me that the only way to get through hard times was to keep moving forward, keep fighting. So I kept working, saved every penny, and finally earned enough for a ticket. But by then, it was February and there was snow everywhere, and the trains were running so slowly. Then we hit another delay in Kansas, some kind of dispute between railroad companies about whose tracks we could use. I spent 3 weeks in a town called Ellsworth, waiting for it to be resolved. Xavier listened, his anger growing at every obstacle she had faced, every setback and disappointment. But beneath the anger was awe at her perseverance, her refusal to give up despite everything working against her. "I kept your telegram," she said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It was worn even more than his, the creases threatening to tear through the words. "And the letters you sent. Every time I wanted to quit, I would read them and remember why I was doing this." They reached the livery and Xavier saddled his horse, a steady roan mare named Juniper. He helped Theresa mount, then swung up behind her, grateful for an excuse to keep her close. Her carpetbag was tied securely behind the saddle. As they rode out of Fort Lyon toward his ranch, Theresa leaned back against his chest and he wrapped one arm around her waist, holding her secure. The prairie stretched out around them, golden grass waving in the breeze, the mountains visible in the distance. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "Tell me about our home." So he did, describing the house and the land, the cattle and the horses, the life he had built and now wanted to share with her. He told her about the neighbors, the Johnsons and the Donnellys and old Mr. Peterson who ran the general store in town. He told her about Marcus and the ranch hands, about Mrs. Patterson's kindness and Henderson's patience with his vigil at the station. "They all believed you would come," he said. "Even when I started to doubt, they kept believing." "Did you doubt?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "There were dark moments, late at night when it was cold and my body hurt from sleeping on that bench, when I wondered if I was a fool. But then morning would come, and with it the possibility that today might be the day, and that possibility was stronger than any doubt." Theresa turned her head to look at him, her green eyes searching his face. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that kind of faith. You already are." The ranch appeared on the horizon, the house sitting solid and welcoming against the backdrop of the Rockies. Xavier felt Theresa tense in his arms, nervous energy radiating from her. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Wait until you see inside." But first they were greeted by Marcus and the hands who had apparently been watching for them. News traveled fast in small communities, and word of Theresa's arrival had reached the ranch ahead of them. Marcus approached with a broad smile, sweeping his hat off his head. "You must be Miss Edwards. We have heard a lot about you." "All good, I hope," Theresa said, accepting Xavier's help to dismount. "The best. Any woman who can inspire that kind of devotion must be something special." She blushed, and Xavier felt a surge of pride and possessiveness. This woman had traveled across half the country through delays and setbacks and hardships, all to be with him. She was his, and he was hers, and nothing would ever change that. He showed her the house, watching her face as she took in the parlor with its eastern windows, the bedroom with the careful quilt, the kitchen with a new stove he had ordered from Denver. Her eyes filled with tears again, but they were happy tears this time. "You did all this for me, for us. This is our home, Theresa. Everything I have, everything I am, it is all yours." She turned to him, and there was something in her expression that made his breath catch. It was love, pure and simple, but also gratitude and wonder and a fierce determination. "When can we get married?" she asked. He laughed, the sound startling him with its genuine joy. When was the last time he had really laughed? "As soon as you want. Tomorrow, if you are ready." "I have been ready for a year, but maybe we should wait a few days, give me time to clean up and at least look presentable for our wedding." "You could wear a flour sack and still be the most beautiful bride in Colorado." She stepped closer, her hands resting on his chest. 6 months, Xavier. You waited for me for 6 months. Most men would have given up after a week. I am not most men, and you are not most women." She stood on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet, a preview of all the kisses to come in their life together. They were married 5 days later in the small church in Fort Lyon, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Father Donnelly performed the ceremony, his voice warm with approval as he spoke about love and faith and commitment. Theresa wore a dress borrowed from Charlotte Donnelly, altered to fit her slimmer frame. Mrs. Patterson had woven wildflowers into her hair, creating a crown of color that made her look like something from a fairy story. Xavier wore his best suit, brushed clean and pressed, though he felt uncomfortable in the formal clothing after months of living in his work clothes on the platform. But none of that mattered when he saw Theresa walking down the aisle toward him, her eyes locked on his, her smile radiant. In that moment, every day of waiting, every cold night and moment of doubt was worth it. They exchanged vows, traditional words that felt anything but ordinary coming from their lips. When Father Donnelly pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause and cheers. Xavier kissed his bride, his wife, and felt a completeness he had not known was possible. The reception was held at the town hall, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. People kept approaching them, sharing their own stories of waiting and perseverance, of faith rewarded. Xavier realized that his vigil at the station had become something larger than just his personal story. It had become a symbol for the entire community, a reminder that good things came to those who did not give up. As the evening wore on, Xavier and Theresa slipped away, riding back to the ranch under a canopy of stars. The night was warm, spring fully established now, and the air smelled of sage and possibility. At home, in their bedroom, they came together as husband and wife for the first time. There was tenderness and passion, nervousness and joy. It was not perfect, not the orchestrated romance of novels, but it was real and it was theirs. Afterward, lying tangled in the quilt Mrs. Patterson had made, Theresa traced patterns on Xavier's chest with her fingertips. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find this is all a dream, that I am still on some train somewhere, still traveling, still trying to get here. This is real. I am real. We are real. Tell me about those 6 months," she said. "Tell me what it was really like. I want to know everything." So he did. He told her about the first day, the hope and excitement that had gradually transformed into determination, and then stubbornness. He told her about the cold nights and the pitying looks, about Marcus's concern and Henderson's patience. He told her about the moments of doubt, the dark hours when he wondered if he was being foolish. "But every morning the sun would rise," he said, "and I would think maybe today she will arrive, and that hope was enough to keep me going." Theresa was crying again, silent tears that rolled down her cheeks and onto his chest. "I do not know how to thank you. I do not know how to repay that kind of faith. You already have. You are here. You did not give up either, even when you had every reason to. We both chose each other, Theresa. Every single day we both chose this." She kissed him, and the kiss deepened, leading to more lovemaking, less tentative this time, more confident. They were learning each other, discovering the geography of their joined lives. The next days and weeks settled into a rhythm. Theresa took over running the household, bringing a woman's touch to the bachelor ranch. She planted a garden, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the Colorado soil. She learned to cook on the wood stove, sometimes succeeding, sometimes burning things spectacularly, but always laughing at her mistakes. Xavier returned to the daily work of the ranch, though he found himself constantly checking to make sure Theresa was still there, that she was real and not some elaborate dream his lonely mind had conjured on that platform. She seemed to understand, always meeting his seeking glances with a smile or a touch that reassured him. Marcus and the hands adored her. She treated them with respect and kindness, learning their names and their stories, baking pies that became legendary. On Sundays, she insisted on cooking a large meal for everyone, creating a sense of family among the scattered collection of cowboys and drifters who worked the ranch. One evening in May, about a month after the wedding, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Theresa leaned against Xavier's side, his arm around her shoulders, both of them quiet in the peaceful moment. "I have been thinking," Theresa said finally, "about all those telegrams and letters you sent. You spent so much money trying to reach me. Money well spent. Still, we should start saving, building up reserves in case we need it. For what?" She turned to look at him, her hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "For this baby we are going to have." Xavier stared at her, his mind needing a moment to process her words. "Baby, you are pregnant?" "I think so. It is still early, but yes, I believe so. A baby." His child. Their child. The magnitude of it crashed over him, and suddenly he was lifting her, spinning her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, he immediately became worried. "Should I have done that? Did I hurt you?" "The baby," she laughed, taking his face in her hands. "I am pregnant, not made of glass. The baby is fine. I am fine. We are all fine." But he insisted she sit down, fetching her a blanket even though the evening was warm, bringing her water and bread and anything else he could think of. She bore his hovering with amused patience, understanding that this was his way of expressing love and fear and excitement all at once. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Theresa bloomed with health, her skin glowing, her body rounding with their child. Xavier became even more protective, if that was possible, insisting she rest frequently, refusing to let her do any heavy work. Mrs. Patterson visited regularly, bringing advice and baby clothes she had sewn. Charlotte Donnelly came by to share her own experiences of motherhood, her 3 children playing in the yard while the women talked. On a warm day in August, as Theresa was hanging laundry, she suddenly went very still. Xavier, who had been mending a fence nearby, noticed immediately and rushed over. "What is it? What is wrong?" She grabbed his hand and placed it on her swollen belly. "Wait, just wait." He felt it then, a flutter beneath his palm like a butterfly trapped inside her. The baby. Their baby moving. "Is that normal?" he asked, wonder and fear mixing in his voice. "Very normal. It means the baby is healthy and strong." He kept his hand there, feeling the occasional movement, marveling at the life they had created. This child was a product of their love, of his 6 months of waiting and her determination to reach him. This baby was proof that faith and patience were rewarded. "Boy or girl?" he asked. "Does it matter?" "Not even a little bit." In late September, as the leaves began to turn and the air took on a crisp edge that reminded Xavier of the day Theresa was supposed to arrive nearly a year ago, Mrs. Patterson moved into the ranch house. The baby would come soon, she explained, and it was better for her to be there than to have to be fetched in an emergency. Xavier was grateful for her presence, especially as Theresa became more uncomfortable, her belly huge now, her movements slower. She still insisted on doing what she could, but she tired easily and often fell asleep in the middle of conversations. The labor started on October 1st, a week before their 1-year anniversary of that first day at the station. Xavier was feeding the horses when Mrs. Patterson appeared in the barn doorway, her face calm but serious. "It is time." His heart stopped, then started again, racing. "Now, right now. Babies come when they are ready. Go fetch the doctor from town. I will stay with her." The ride to Fort Lyon was a blur. Xavier pushed Juniper as fast as he dared, terrified that something would go wrong, that he would lose Theresa or the baby or both. The doctor, an elderly man named Harrison, grabbed his bag and rode back with Xavier without hesitation. At the house, they could hear Theresa's cries, sounds of pain that made Xavier's stomach clench. He tried to go to her, but Mrs. Patterson blocked the door. "This is women's work. You will only be in the way. She needs me. What she needs is for you to stay calm and let us help her. Go, walk. Pray. Do whatever you need to do, but stay out of this room." So Xavier paced, walking circles around the house, through the barn, across the yard. The sounds of labor continued for hours, Theresa's cries interspersed with Mrs. Patterson's soothing voice and Dr. Harrison's calm instructions. Marcus found him at some point, placing a hand on his shoulder. "She will be fine. She is strong." "What if she is not? What if something goes wrong? Then you will deal with it. But worrying will not help anything." Night fell, and still the labor continued. Xavier had given up pacing and sat on the porch steps, his head in his hands, praying to a God he was not sure listened but hoped was paying attention now. And then, cutting through the night, a new sound. A baby's cry, strong and lusty and perfect. Xavier was on his feet and through the door before he consciously decided to move. Mrs. Patterson met him in the hallway, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son. A healthy, beautiful boy. A son." He had a son. Dr. Harrison emerged from the bedroom. "Your wife is doing well. She is exhausted but healthy. You can see them now." Xavier entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Theresa lay in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but radiant, and in her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was a tiny bundle. "Come meet your son," she said, her voice hoarse but happy. Xavier approached slowly, almost afraid to look, afraid this perfect moment would shatter if he moved too quickly. But then he was beside the bed, looking down at the smallest person he had ever seen. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a face scrunched up in displeasure at being brought into the world. But even in that moment, Xavier could see traces of Theresa in his features, the shape of his nose, the curve of his lips. "He is perfect," Xavier whispered. "Would you like to hold him?" Carefully, terrified he would break this fragile creature, Xavier took his son into his arms. The baby was heavier than he expected, but also impossibly light. He stared down at the little face, and when the baby opened his eyes, Xavier felt his heart crack wide open with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "What should we name him?" Theresa asked. Xavier thought about the past year, about waiting and faith and the journey that had brought them to this moment. "How about Samuel, after the barber who gave me a free shave because he believed in our story?" Theresa smiled. "Samuel Quinn, I like it. It is a good, strong name." They sat together, the three of them, Xavier perched on the edge of the bed, their son in his arms, Theresa's hand in his. Through the window, the stars shone bright and clear, the same stars that had watched over Xavier during those long nights at the station. "A year ago," Theresa said, "I was somewhere in Missouri, stranded and scared, wondering if I would ever make it here. And now look at us. A year ago, I was starting what would become a 6-month wait. If someone had told me then how long it would take, I do not know if I would have believed I could do it. But you did. We both did." Little Samuel made a small sound, a squeaking cry that was more curiosity than distress. Xavier rocked him gently, instinct guiding his movements. "He is going to grow up hearing the story of how his father waited 6 months at a train station," Theresa said. "He is going to know what real love looks like." Xavier leaned down and kissed her forehead, then the baby's. "He is going to grow up surrounded by love. That is what matters." The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and constant wonder. Samuel was a good baby, relatively quiet, nursing well, growing stronger every day. Xavier found himself mesmerized by every small thing his son did, every yawn and stretch and tiny grip of his fingers. The ranch continued to operate, with Marcus taking on more responsibility so Xavier could focus on his family. Neighbors visited regularly, bringing food and gifts and congratulations. The story of the cowboy who had waited 6 months and was now blessed with a son became part of Fort Lyon's folklore, told and retold with pride. On October 15th, the one-year anniversary of the day Theresa was supposed to arrive, they took Samuel to the train station. Henderson greeted them warmly, immediately asking to hold the baby. "Hard to believe it was a year ago," he said, gently bouncing Samuel. "You standing on this platform every day, rain or shine." "Seems like a lifetime ago," Xavier said, his arm around Theresa's waist. "And yesterday," she added. They stood together on the platform, watching a train pull in, passengers disembarking. Xavier thought about how many times he had done this, how many faces he had scanned hoping to see Theresa's. It seemed impossible that those long months of waiting had been real, that he had actually done it. But here was the proof. Theresa beside him, Samuel in Henderson's arms, their life together spreading out before them with endless possibility. As they rode home, Samuel asleep in a sling against Theresa's chest, Xavier found himself thinking about faith and patience and love. About how the best things in life were often worth waiting for, worth fighting for. About how giving up would have been easier, but perseverance brought rewards beyond imagination. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the region. Xavier's reputation as a fair employer and shrewd businessman spread, but so did the story of his devotion, of the 6 months at the station. Samuel grew into a sturdy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's determination. When he was 3, he was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, who had Theresa's dark hair and Xavier's smile. 2 years after that, another boy, James, completed their family. The house expanded with each child, Xavier adding rooms and porches, creating space for their growing family. The dinner table that had once sat 2 now accommodated 5, 6 when Marcus joined them, which was often. Samuel, as he grew older, loved hearing the story of how his parents met, how his father had waited. Xavier never tired of telling it, though each time Theresa would add details he left out, reminding him of the difficulty of her journey. "Your father likes to make it sound like he was the only one being patient," she would say, pulling Samuel onto her lap. "But I was fighting my way across half the country, determined to get here." "You were both stubborn," Marcus would chime in, "made for each other." On their 5th anniversary, Xavier surprised Theresa with a gift. It was a painting he had commissioned from an artist in Denver, depicting the Fort Lyon train station as it had looked that day in October when she finally arrived. In the painting, a man stood on the platform and a woman was stepping off the train, their eyes meeting across the distance. Theresa cried when she saw it, touching the painted figures gently. "I want to hang this where we can see it every day," she said. "So we never forget what we overcame to be together." They hung it in the parlor over the fireplace, where it became a focal point of the house. Visitors always asked about it, and Xavier or Theresa would tell the story, their children chiming in with their favorite parts. As the children grew, they each showed different aspects of their parents' characters. Samuel inherited Xavier's patience and steadiness, content to work long hours on the ranch without complaint. Elizabeth had Theresa's fierce determination, refusing to be left behind or told she could not do something because she was a girl. James was a blend of both, patient when he needed to be, but also willing to fight for what he wanted. Xavier taught his sons to ride and rope, to read the weather and the land. But he also taught them about love and commitment, about the importance of keeping promises. He wanted them to grow into men who understood that strength was not just physical, that real power came from devotion and integrity. Theresa taught Elizabeth and her brothers to read and write, to think critically and question assumptions. She told them stories of her journey west, not to complain but to illustrate that obstacles could be overcome, that determination and faith could move mountains. On winter evenings, when the work was done and the children were in bed, Xavier and Theresa would sit together by the fire, talking about their day, their dreams, their life. Sometimes they spoke of the future, of what would become of the ranch when they were gone, of the legacy they wanted to leave. But often, they spoke of the past, of St. Louis and the boarding house where they met, of those letters exchanged across the miles, of 6 months on a train platform and the faith that had sustained them both. "You ever regret it?" Theresa asked one night, nearly 10 years after that first day at the station. "All those months waiting, all that time you could have been living your life." Xavier pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I was living my life. I was waiting for you. There is no better way I could have spent that time. Even the cold nights, even when you were not sure I would come, especially then, because that is when faith means something. When it is easy, it is not really faith. It is just certainty. But when it is hard, when you have to choose to believe even when everything says you should not, that is when it counts." She was quiet for a moment, her hand finding his. "I think about the woman I was in St. Louis, scared and alone, thinking a ranch hand from Colorado was my only chance at happiness. I did not know then that you were not just a chance, you were the certainty. You were the one thing I could count on when everything else fell apart. We saved each other. Yes, we did. The children grew and eventually began to leave the nest. Samuel married a local girl, Charlotte Donnelly's younger sister Rebecca, and they took over part of the ranch, building their own house on the northern section. Elizabeth shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to be a teacher, moving to Denver to attend a college there. James, the youngest, was still deciding his path, torn between following his brother into ranching and his sister into education. Xavier and Theresa entered their middle years with grace, their love deeper and richer than it had been in those early days of passion and uncertainty. They knew each other completely now, all the rough edges smoothed by time and familiarity. They could communicate with a glance, could sense each other's moods and needs without words. On their 20th anniversary, Xavier took Theresa back to the train station. It had changed over the years, expanded and modernized, but the platform where he had spent those 6 months was still the same. They stood together where he had stood alone for so long, his arm around her, both of them older and grayer but no less in love. 20 years, Theresa said. "It has gone so fast." "And so slow," Xavier replied. "I feel like I have lived a dozen lifetimes with you. Good lifetimes, the best." A train pulled in, passengers disembarking, and they watched the reunions happening around them. A soldier greeted by his family. A businessman met by associates. A young couple embracing, their love new and uncertain. "We were them once," Theresa said, nodding toward the couple. "We still are. Every day I see you, it is like you are arriving all over again." She turned to him, her green eyes still as bright as they had been in that St. Louis boarding house. "You are going to make me cry. You always cry. Only because you always know exactly what to say." They kissed there on the platform, not caring who saw, not concerned with propriety. They had earned this, earned each other, earned the right to show their love openly and without shame. Henderson, now retired but still living in Fort Lyon, happened to be at the station that day. He approached them with a broad smile. "You two are a sight. Still acting like newlyweds after all these years." "Some things never change," Xavier said. "Thank God for that," Henderson replied. "This town needs reminders of what real love looks like. Too many people give up too easy these days." Walking back to their wagon, Theresa leaned her head on Xavier's shoulder. "Do you think our grandchildren will understand? When we tell them the story, do you think they will really get what it meant? Maybe not now. But someday, when they are older and have loved and lost and fought for something, they will understand. Stories like ours are not just about us. They are about everyone who has ever had to wait for something good, who has ever had to believe when it was hard." That is a lot of pressure on one story. Then it is good that it is a true one. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and celebrations, births and deaths, joy and sorrow. Xavier's hair turned from dark brown to gray to white. Theresa's face gained lines that mapped their years together, each wrinkle a story, each laugh line a memory. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents. The ranch house that had once echoed with just their voices now rang with the laughter of multiple generations. Sunday dinners became legendary events, with dozens of family members crowding around tables set end to end, sharing food and stories and love. Xavier's health began to fail in his 70s, his strong body finally showing the wear of decades of hard work and that long winter of waiting at the station. Theresa nursed him with the same determination she had shown making her way across the country, refusing to let him give up, insisting that he still had years left. And he did. Years of sitting on the porch watching the sun set, of holding great-grandchildren on his lap, of looking at Theresa and feeling that same rush of love he had felt the first time he saw her. On a warm spring day, much like the day she had finally arrived all those years ago, Xavier and Theresa sat together on their porch. He was 83, she was 80, both of them weathered by time but still fundamentally themselves. "You remember what today is?" Theresa asked. Xavier thought for a moment, then smiled. 57 years since you stepped off that train. 57 years, more than half a century. Best years of my life, all of them, every single one, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts because we faced them together. Samuel, now a grandfather himself, rode up to the house with his youngest grandson, a boy of 7 named Xavier after his great-grandfather. They joined the old couple on the porch, and young Xavier immediately climbed into his namesake's lap. "Tell me the story, great-grandpa," the boy demanded. "Tell me about waiting for great-grandma." Xavier looked at Theresa, who nodded her encouragement. So he told the story again, as he had told it hundreds of times before. But this time, feeling the weight of years and the precious fragility of life, he told it with special care, wanting to make sure young Xavier understood. He spoke of faith and patience, of love that endured despite obstacles. He spoke of cold nights and long days, of doubt and determination. He spoke of the moment Theresa stepped off that train and how his world had finally been complete. "The important thing," he said, his hand finding Theresa's as it always did, "is that we never gave up. Not on each other, not on our love, not on the life we wanted to build together. And that is the secret, young man. Whatever you want in life, you have to be willing to wait for it, to fight for it, to believe in it even when it seems impossible." Young Xavier nodded solemnly, not fully understanding but sensing the importance of what he was being told. "I am going to wait for someone special, just like you did." "I hope you find them much faster than 6 months," Theresa said with a laugh. "But if you have to wait, if it takes years or decades, remember that the best things are worth the patience." That night, lying in bed with the window open to let in the spring breeze, Xavier held Theresa close. They fit together perfectly after all these years, each curve and angle familiar and cherished. "I would do it again," he said into the darkness. "If I had to live my whole life over, I would spend 6 months on that platform all over again, just to have this." "I would cross the country again," Theresa replied, "through every delay and setback and hardship just to end up here with you. We are lucky. We are blessed." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the memories of a lifetime together. And if their dreams took them back to a train platform in October, and the moment their eyes met across the distance, well, that was just another gift of a love that had transcended time and circumstance. Xavier Quinn died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 88, Theresa beside him as she had been for more than 60 years. His funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Colorado, people coming from miles around to pay respects to the man whose story of devotion had become legend. Theresa lived another 5 years, spending her days surrounded by family, telling and retelling the story of her journey west and the cowboy who had waited. She kept the painting of the train station beside her bed, and more than once, family members found her talking to it, to the painted figures that represented who she and Xavier had been. When she died at 85, she was buried beside Xavier in the Fort Lyon cemetery, under a stone that read, "Together at last, forever this time. The wait was always worth it." Their legacy lived on, not just in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but in the story that continued to be told. The painting of the train station was donated to the Fort Lyon Historical Society, where it hung with a plaque explaining the story. The bench Xavier had sat on for 6 months was preserved and placed in the town square, a monument to patience and faith and enduring love. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and families gathered on porches across Colorado, someone would inevitably say, "Did I ever tell you about Xavier Quinn and Theresa Edwards? About the cowboy who waited 6 months at the train station?" And the story would be told again, passed down through generations, a reminder that true love was not just passion and romance but patience and faith, and the willingness to wait, as long as necessary, for the person who completed your soul. The ranch continued to operate, passed from Samuel to his children, and then to their children, each generation adding their own chapters to the story, but never forgetting the foundation on which it was built. The house, expanded and renovated over the years, still contained that original parlor with windows facing east to catch the sunrise, still held the bedroom where 3 generations of Quinns had been born. And every year on October 15th, the family gathered at the train station, standing together on that platform, remembering Xavier's vigil and Theresa's determination. They told the story to the youngest members, making sure they understood what their great-great-grandparents had sacrificed and endured and overcome. Because some stories are too important to let fade. Some examples of love are too powerful to be forgotten. And some journeys, whether they take 6 months or 60 years, are worth every moment of waiting. Xavier and Theresa's story was all of those things and more. It was proof that faith could move mountains, that patience was its own reward, and that true love, the kind that endured against all odds, was the most powerful force in the world. And every time a train pulled into the Fort Lyon station, every time passengers disembarked and reunions happened on that old platform, the spirits of a patient cowboy and the woman he waited for were there, watching, remembering, and smiling at the continuation of a story that would never truly end.